The Hoopheads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hi, this is Coach Corey Harris from the Beijing Royal Fighters CBA team, and you're listening to the Hoopheads Podcast. Let's get into it.
Hey Hoopheads! Wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and they truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads Podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Also, make sure to check out the new Dr. Dish Home Machine, which is perfect for these crazy times when gyms and schools are closed. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
We practice more in the jungle than the zoo, so we're preparing our players to play against pressure in the free-flowing, unscripted moments of the game.
Mark Cascio is the Boys Head Varsity Basketball Coach at Catholic High School in Baton Rogue, Louisiana. As a head coach, Mark's teams have won 7 district titles, appeared in 5 Final Fours, and captured a state championship in 2012. Coach Cascio was a head coach at the age of 21 and is the youngest coach to capture a state title in Louisiana at the age of 26. Mark started Courtside Consulting in 2019 to continue fostering his love of the game by sharing with colleagues in the coaching profession. Cascio partners with coaches to provide professional advice, first-class resources, and a system to improve, refine, and apply new concepts in any phase of the game. His up-tempo style of offense blends concepts to create pace, spacing, shooting, and attacking. This style of play allows players freedom to use their individual skills to create plays for themselves or their teammates in a fun, fast-paced system. However, Mark and Courtside Consulting are committed to implementing any system that suits their client's style and personnel. Don't miss our Hoopheads Pod webinar series with some of the top minds in the game across all levels, from grassroots to the NBA. If you're focused on improving your coaching and your team, we've got you covered. Visit hoopheadspod.com/webinars to get registered. Make sure you check out Thrive with Trevor Huffman and Beyond the Ball, 2 new podcasts from the Hoopheads Podcast Network. And if you like what you're hearing, please consider leaving us a rating and review on your favorite podcast app. Have your notebook handy as you listen to this episode with Mark Cascio, head boys coach at Catholic High School in Baton Rogue, Louisiana. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel tonight, and we are pleased to welcome to the podcast from Baton Rogue, Louisiana, and Catholic High School, Mark Cascio. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it and enjoy talking hoops.
We are excited to have you on, get a chance to dig into all the great things that you've been able to do in the game of basketball. Want to start out by going back in time to when you were a kid. Just give us an idea of how you fell in love with the game, maybe your first introduction to it, what you loved about it when you were younger.
Oh, so I was born and raised in Baton Rouge and just into a basketball family. Fortunate to have an older brother that loved the game too. So really, I would say some of my earliest memories of basketball would be at my house, and my brother would have Pistol Pete's homework basketball on. And
Nice.
he would have a notebook out, like counting how many reps he got in a certain amount of time and writing it down. And when we moved, when I was, about 9 years old, and we poured a slab of concrete in the backyard with a hoop. And so just always grew up with a basketball handy. And, my mom grew up watching Pistol Pete. So we heard those stories. I grew up in like the Dale Brown, Chris Jackson, Shaquille O'Neal era. So just basketball family. And I would say Pistol Pete is responsible for me really, really falling in love with the game.
That's a pretty good role model. I know I spent a lot of time when I was younger watching the old videos and doing the stationary ball handling routine that probably every kid of our era did when they were younger. And Pistol Pete is certainly a guy that you see some of the highlights, but I think that people today don't necessarily appreciate him. And then same thing that, you mentioned Chris Jackson. And I think he's one of those lost careers in the NBA of a guy when you go back and watch what he was like at LSU and how good he was. And obviously he had the issue with Tourette syndrome and all that. But man, that guy was fun to watch and super talented.
For sure. Yeah. And just LSU's basketball history as a whole isn't as decorated as other, as like the main blue blood programs. But if you look at the players that have come through that program, they just had some special players. So really lucky to be able to just be around, in Baton Rouge, around great players and great coaches.
Did you find yourself chasing your brother around a lot and trying to keep up with him? Was that part of your development as a player?
Yeah. He's 4 years older than me, so we're close enough to where we can compete against each other, but far enough apart to where he was always kicking my butt. And he was always, the best player on his teams. And I just saw his work ethic. And I think and he probably doesn't even know this, but just at a very early age, just seeing him work and just be so detail oriented. At the time, being that young, you don't realize that he's teaching you a way. You just kind of think that that's normal. Yeah, I've always admired that. And I really think, and that was the only sport he really worked at like that. So it just became natural to me just to grow up loving the game.
Did you play other things when you were younger besides basketball, or was basketball always the focus just because of your brother?
We always played everything. That's just kind of how it was. I'm 35 years old, so I'm not old, but I'm old enough to where all the, travel baseball wasn't quite as big, and the specializing in sports wasn't really a thing until later. And so we grew up, we would just go from one season to the next, not even really thinking about not playing a sport. That's just who we were, especially down south, sports are big. And then also, like, we just thinking about growing up, and I've never really thought about this until thinking back to like homework basketball. There's a lot of like legendary movies that I've never seen. Like I've never seen Star Wars or Indiana Jones, which people my age would, it's kind of crazy. I've never seen those.
Wait a second. Wait a second.
All right, so you got him, Mark. Here he comes.
Wait a second. You've never seen Star Wars or Indiana Jones? What?
Never. Not one of them.
Why not?
Because I was gonna say, just because sports were always on in my house, like that's just not something that we got into. It was we watched TV, I guess, just normal TV. But if it was I don't know, it was always games on. It was games or homework basketball, something like that. We just never got into that.
So have you seen Space Jam?
I have, yes.
Okay. Well, we had a recent conversation.
I'm not that crazy.
Well, no. So here's the thing, though. We were talking about it. Like Space Jam, if you go back and watch it now, is terrible. Like really, it's really, really bad. So I don't know when the most recent time you watched it, but I watched it with my two kids recently. Oh man, is it terrible? So
I've got a daughter that loves sports and basketball, and we watched it recently. And you were right; it is horrible acting, just bad all around. But a legend, like iconic movie.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I'm gonna see myself out of the conversation now. Bye.
It's funny though that you say that, because I think about, I wasn't necessarily that way as much when I was younger. Like I definitely was attuned to pop culture, but what I found is as I became a parent, that those things went away. So there got to be times, and this will tell you how old I am, but when I used to thumb through the newspaper and I'd see like the TV listings, and I would look and I would see a movie list, and I'm like, oh, I remember that movie. I wouldn't mind seeing that. Then I look at it, it'd be like from 1996, it'd be from like 20 years ago. I'm like, yeah, I haven't really seen too many movies. So Star Wars and Indiana Jones I've seen, but I'm sure people would be stunned if you went through a list of movies that I haven't seen. Same way. It's kind of like you have to pick and choose where you spend your time, for sure.
Exactly.
And so I think that when you're focused on sports and on getting better and doing those things, and I grew up in a sports household too, and you just think about, I don't know, just the amount of time that you put in as a kid. And I think about this current situation that we're all in. And in a lot of ways, my life was almost like this when I was younger, because I would just spend hours and hours and hours in my driveway when I was in elementary school, just shooting baskets. And, now that's kind of the situation we're all in because we don't have many other options based on this whole situation. So this will be a good tangent at this point. What are you doing with your players right now just to kind of stay in touch with them?
We're connected through GroupMe. Every day, we started as coaches sharing workouts to do and for our team, and they would video themselves doing it and turn it in. It wasn't really mandatory. It was just encouraging them to participate. I think a lot of coaches are focused on, their players getting a workout in, whether it's strength and conditioning or skill development. And we are too, for sure. In fact, our players are now, it's a player-led workout. They're sending the workout to the team and everybody kind of follows suit. But on top of that, I think at the top of my list was team chemistry and team building too. And I think at this time that can get thrown by the wayside with us just so focused on, well, we can't be in the gym, we can't be in the workout, so we got to get bigger, stronger, and better. I think at this point in the season, one thing we get a lot of is just that camaraderie with, your juniors are now seniors. So they look around in the weight room and they're the oldest guys. Or if you go play pickup, they're the alpha dogs in there. So just giving them a chance to have that cool, first experience of their senior season. And just trying, we're meeting over Zoom. I'm FaceTiming with my players, just as much things that we can do to stay connected, whether we're getting better or not. I mean, that's kind of up to them at this point.
Yeah, everybody's kind of in the same boat. I know that's one of the things that we've kind of been talking to coaches about is everybody's got their own way of going about trying to stay connected. And clearly people are using a lot of Zoom meetings and sharing workouts like you talked about and just trying to keep the team together and keep it cohesive and keep that unity. But everybody, I think, is just kind of flying by the seat of their pants, trying to figure out what's the best way to go about doing it. And I guess that, like I said, the saving grace is that we're all kind of in that same boat. Everybody has to figure it out and kind of make it work on the fly. And as you said, in a lot of cases, it can be, you think about the old saying of, player-driven teams are better off than coach-driven teams. And this is an opportunity, again, for a lot of kids to kind of step up, as you said, into that leadership role and kind of take control over, hey, we need to be getting things done when we can't all be together as a team.
Right. And one cool thing that's developed is I think as coaches, we're all trying to get our players to be comfortable coaching each other, giving constructive criticism or just encouragement, any kind of feedback. And throughout our GroupMe with our team, when players finish the workout, they'll send, some feedback. Like, I really liked this part of the workout. It really challenged me. So I think that's really cool. I think if we weren't in a pandemic and all quarantine, I don't think they would go to the locker room and talk about how much they really enjoyed the cleaning part of our workout. So there's some, just like everything, there's going to be some positives that we can all take away from this. And I know just from a coaching standpoint, there's a lot of big projects that it's hard to find time for, or a lot of things that I do in the fall I'm knocking out now just so I can be ahead of the game when we do come back. I'm a guy that I can't sit around and do nothing. So I'll either be walking around my house cleaning up, or if I ever find downtime, I'm going to my home office, and there's always something we can do.
All right. So what's something that you're doing right now that normally you would be doing in the fall, things that you can kind of get ahead of?
I've been putting together drill libraries. I think, sometimes as coaches, we reference these things. Sometimes you kind of learn as you do them, whether you go back and reference them or not. I found a cool way to do a drill library is to link everything to a video of your drill. So we'll cut up our practice drills. And then that way, if I hire a coach, I can just hand over this drill library where if he wants to learn on his own, he clicks on a drill, he sees the drill, he can hear the teaching points. So I'm doing a big upgrade of that because I'm a firm believer of there's always a better way to do something. So even though we had a pretty good system for it, I'm updating that.
How many drills you have in there?
I don't have them numbered. I mean, it's a lot. It's like a 10-page document, but a lot of them are we do a lot of the same thing. We use a lot of the same drills with different emphasis.
Right. Got it.
So it might be one drill, but these are 10 different things you can hit on with this one drill. So, just always finding ways to do something better. I'm breaking down a lot of film, a deep dive that I probably wouldn't have done at this point. And then also, like in the fall, it falls on me to make our media guide or season program that we do. We sell ads in there, use it as a fundraiser. I'm usually always scrambling in September, October to get it done for November. And now I want to go into the summer with it done, where I just got to plug in some pictures and I'm good. So we're all about gaining advantages in our program. We're not always the most talented or the most athletic team. So we try to be the most hydrated team, the most rested team, the most prepared team. And then now I'm just trying to gain any advantage that we can. Because like you said, we're all experiencing this. And I just think the coaches and the players that do the most in this time will be in better shape when we all come back. The biggest thing I'm telling my players is if we're fortunate enough to get summer basketball, I think the guys that are going to play the most are just the ones that show up in shape. So just any advantage that we can get, we're always preaching to our players that we got to find it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you can impart that to your players, then I think it goes to what you just been talking about for yourself as a coach. And I know how important it is as the head coach and the leader of a program to be modeling that hard work and that growth mindset and that work ethic. And if you're able to demonstrate that to your players through this time, through just the things that you're doing and putting them through workouts and going in and studying film and letting them know what you're doing on your end of it to keep up your end of the bargain, then players, again, they see what their leader does and they're much more likely to follow your lead, as opposed to, if you're a coach and you're just kind of depressed because of the whole situation and you kind of shut it down. I think your players probably tend to do that same thing. And I think you're right that players who come back, and hopefully whether it's this summer or whether it's the fall or whenever we get back, the players who have put the time in and have been led in the right way, I think are going to come back as prepared as they could possibly be without clearly having the opportunity to get out and play and get up and down the floor.
Yeah, and I think we're lucky as basketball coaches that you don't need somebody else to work with to get better. Obviously, if you got a defender out there, it helps, or if you could play some organized games, it would help. But you can go out there with a ball and a hoop and get a lot done. So I think other sports, baseball, football, you can do some things, but at a certain point you need, more equipment, more space, and more people. So I think we're lucky in that regard.
I agree with you. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about off the top, where you think about why, as basketball people, why we fell in love with the game. And I think that's one of the things that when I think back on my childhood, one of the things that I loved about basketball compared to the other sports that I played was just what you said, that there's always an opportunity to get better. I didn't need somebody else who wanted to practice basketball for 4 hours in order to practice basketball for 4 hours. If I wanted to be a better football quarterback, I would have had to have at least one other person that was willing to run patterns. Or if I was going to be a baseball player, I needed someone to pitch to me or it's more complicated, I think, in other sports to become good. And with basketball, I think that's one of the things that appeals to kids at a younger age. So going back to you as a time when you were playing, talk a little bit about your high school experience as a basketball player and maybe give us a highlight or two, and then maybe talk about some of the things that may have shaped you as a coach from your experiences as a player.
Good question. So, my high school was, it's a 5A school. I'm coaching at my alma mater. I went to Catholic, and just all of our sports are very competitive, and we're very good at what we do in a lot of sports just because the school has really high standards for everybody. And so I just thinking back on my high school career, just competing and, I played freshman football and had a really good experience. That was the only year I played, but just going back to just experience as a player, one thing that stuck out when you said an experience as a player that can make you a better coach. I remember it's actually an AAU basketball game. My dad he actually did a very good thing for me, and he made me go play on a team with a bunch of guys I did not know. They were all from a different neighborhood, and they all knew each other. They had all played together, and I was kind of the new guy on that team. And I remember playing in a game, and I airballed a shot, and I didn't shoot anymore. I just thought, and I thought I was doing a good thing, just like, oh, this is not my day. Like, I'm going to not shoot anymore. And no one said anything for a while until later in the game. Coach said, like, why are you not shooting? And I just thought it was really obvious. I was like, did you not see that air ball that I threw up? But I think as a player, you just see things in a vacuum, and you just see things from such a different perspective as a coach. The coach at Catholic High School that had the big impact on me was Kemper Todd. Just been a big mentor to my coaching development. He is a great, really great practice coach, very organized, very efficient. So just to be able to see that system, we were a man in motion team. And I think the practice organization, efficiency, and then doing things the right way, breaking down film, preparing your team for every single game, and then learning a man in motion system. We run man primarily. We don't run motion anymore, but I think learning that at a young age is so valuable for players and coaches. It's positionless. You're cutting, moving, screening. Everybody's got a handle. And as a younger player and coach, you don't know really other offenses. I mean, you think you do, but you really don't. So you don't really know what else is out there. You kind of dive into what you're doing, for better or for worse. And I thought that was just a really good learning experience for me. I started coaching at 19. I started coaching a 6th grade team and moved up with them to the 7th grade. And once I did that, especially I think coaching kids for 2 years in a row and really getting close to them, I just kind of fell into that, like, man, why would I choose to do anything else? So I went back to Catholic and spent 2 years as an assistant. And this was back in the days where we had spring practice for 2 weeks in April. And I remember I was just watching the varsity group, and Coach Todd came up to me and said, hey man, this is practice 2 of the spring. He's like, I just got to throw you to the wolves. I got too many guys in my group. And from then on, I was coaching, I was the 3rd group coach when we'd break into 3 groups. And that was huge in my development, just at a 19-year-old coaching 18-year-olds or 17-year-olds, but having to be the head coach of my group, where you really learn by teaching. I didn't have to just be an observer as an assistant. I had to really go out there and teach, which took my, understanding of the game to a whole new level at a young age. And fast forward 2 years, I'm really just hoping I could get a teaching job at Catholic when I graduate, to where one day, 15, 20 years down the line, I could be the head coach there. I was 21 and we had just finished up a summer league game, and my former freshman football coach had left, and he was an AD now, and just called and offered me a basketball job. And I said, well, hey man, look, this is completely blindsiding me. I'm flattered. let me just come talk to you about it and look at the school. And cause it was a school a little outside of Baton Rouge. So one day I went and I met with him, met some of the players, and he was just showing me around the campus, and he introduced me to the principal as the new head basketball coach. And for better or for worse, I don't even know if I've shared that with him. That's what I heard. He would probably say he didn't do that, but in my mind, I was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. I guess I should just take the job. And they had a teaching spot waiting on me. I graduated in December. They had a job waiting for me in January. So made a lot of sense. And it was a great place with very low expectations for the basketball program, which as a 21-year-old head coach, that's exactly what you need. I equate being a head coach to having kids. Is like you can try to get ready, but you're never prepared. You don't know what that seat feels like until you're in it. And that was just a great place to get started for me. And I learned a ton just coaching on the fly as an assistant, and then having to do it as a 21-year-old.
All right. So 2 things that I want to pull out from what you said. First one is going back to thinking about when you were playing, and you just mentioned about some of the things that you saw your coach doing. When you were playing, were you looking at those things through the lens of, hey, someday I want to be in coaching, and so I'm noticing some of these things that my coach is doing? Or was that something that you look back retrospectively after you were done playing and said, oh yeah, now I see these things that he was doing? Which one I think better describes you?
Definitely the latter. I remember sitting in a high school classroom looking at, my teachers that were coaches and saying like, I think I could do this, like I could see myself being a coach, and then quickly being like, hey, I can't wait to get out of school. Like, what am I thinking to go to school for the rest of my life? And it wasn't until I started coaching that I was just like, all right, yeah, like I can't picture myself doing anything else.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's interesting. I love hearing the stories of when coaches come to the realization that coaching is what they want to do. Because I think when they fall into two camps, you either have the person who's like 8 years old and is drawing up plays on a napkin, and everybody's telling them, hey, someday you're going to be a coach, and they are thinking about that. And maybe they have a parent who's a coach, and they just kind of see that as their career track. And then you have other people who they go through and they love the game and they're players, but in the course of their playing career, they're never really thinking about coaching as an option. And then at some point, the playing ends and they start looking around and they want to stay involved in the game, and they kind of fall into coaching and then fall in love with it. And then the other thing that you mentioned while you were talking there was how you talked about just your coach, and you play man and you run your motion offense and you have the drills and kind of the things that your high school coach is doing. This is something that I fell into as a young coach, and I probably didn't handle it nearly as well as what it sounds like you did. But I look back on my time early as a coach, and basically the things that I did were the things that I learned that my high school coach did and the things I learned that my college coach did. And pretty much my knowledge of coaching and what coaching was, both from a culture, relationship standpoint and from an X's and O's drill standpoint, was the programs that I had played in. And I really didn't, as a young coach, do a great job of going out and trying to learn about other places and other things and other ways of looking at the game from a coaching perspective. So talk a little bit about how you went about that as a young coach, expanding your horizons as far as what you were going to do with your teams.
Yeah. So I think early on, just being a loyal assistant coach, and you're so bought into what you're doing, especially as an assistant. I was learning so much that I was just a sponge and really believed in running motion and playing man. And that's what I did my first few years. But I think being such a young head coach, I realized I didn't have all the answers. So I would attend clinics anytime I could. I was fortunate that my head coach would take me with him to clinics where I would get a new perspective, where if I wasn't really trying to push myself to grow and get better, I probably wouldn't have found at such an early age. And I think coaches get comfortable. You're most confident, coaching what you know. But I heard a quote years ago that really stuck with me, and it's most coaches coach the way the game was played. Some coach the way the game is being played presently, and few coach the way the game will be played. And man, that just resonated with me. It's just like, well, what camp am I in? Which one of the three am I? And I fell in love with gathering information. And this was, mid 2000s. So information started circling on the internet, and you could find some things, and social media was starting to kick up to where more information was accessible, and just networking with coaches across the country became a thing. So I think I got into coaching at a great time, where with technology really helping, but also I think just being young, you realize you don't know very much, and there's other things out there. And I just think I am wired to always find a better way. So, and that's really how the system that we run now, really on both ends of the floor, has evolved. I was a motion coach, and then dribble drive came out. And that was really cool when I started thinking like, man, that goes against everything I believe and everything I've been teaching, but it kind of looks cool, And like I said, I was at a program that didn't have very high expectations. I mean, don't get me wrong, we made it better and we poured into those kids and poured into our program. I mean, I've refinished the floor myself. I painted the entire gym by myself. I painted our locker room by myself. Just anything I can do to make it better. So we were kind of at the point where we're going to win X amount of games, kind of no matter what we do. So we experimented with dribble drive, and was fortunate enough to get a pretty big time job at the age of 24. School had just won 4 state titles in the last 5 or 6 years. And I just threw my name in the hat randomly thinking, no way I get this job. Well, they were dumb enough to hire me. And, and then it was like real. So then it's like, okay, well, we did motion. We played around with dribble drive, but like, this is a job where you don't play around with. So I started trying to blend those two things. And then, 11, 12 years later, we've kind of, hit on something that's pretty fun to do. But even going back to that second job, we were in my second year, we won a state title. And I think another kind of aha moment in my coaching career was I went back and it wasn't really I wasn't really breaking down the film. I wasn't evaluating anything. It was more of like, man, we just won a state championship. Just want to relive it. So I just went back and I watched every game. Every day I'd throw in a different game. And what started sticking out to me is like, we're really not scoring a whole lot on what we do offensively. We were running motion because this was the job I wasn't playing. Like I got to go back to my roots, what I know. And we played up tempo. And we had really good players, but when we got settled in the half court, we would, pass, cut, screen away, flare screen. And I noticed like when we'd hit a back cut or a curl cut or a flare screen for a 3, it was beautiful, but it probably accounted for about 20% of our points, 25%. We would,
Right.
We would turn people over, we'd get out in transition. And then you just have these unscripted random moments of the game where I was fortunate to coach some really good players that could play in that environment and make plays. Where I remember, I remember reading a book by Phil Jackson, Sacred Hoops, and he talked about how, very fitting with the Last Dance on, but he talked about I'm not quick to call a timeout. My players will figure it out. And with that state championship team, I was just like, we just gave up a 6-0 run. If I let it go one more possession, we'll probably get an and one. It'll be 6-3. And so they bailed me out of a lot of coaching decisions, but yeah, so I kind of, that was my next moment of just, what we do in the half court is a small part of the game. As long as we're creating advantages and creating great shots, does it really matter what we're doing, how we're finding those shots.
Coaches, we've teamed up with E3 Analytics so you can now purchase 3 of their exclusive new playbooks. If you're looking for ways to improve your team next season, these playbooks blend affordability with the quality content that serious coaches are looking for. Just visit hoopheadspod.com/store and you'll find playbooks from Coach Don Showalter of USA Basketball, Coach Mike Flynn from the Illawarra Hawks in Australia, who coached LaMelo Ball last season, and Coach Tyler Whitcomb from West Michigan Aviation Academy. Check out these great resources at hoopheadspod.com/store. Yeah, I think you hit on it in that you have to, as a coach, evolve over time. And I like the quote that you shared about just where you are in the timeline of coaching. Are you in the past? Are you in the present? Or are you thinking about the future? And I think that's one of the things that good coaches really do is they try to adjust to their personnel. They try to adjust to what's happening in the game. You try to see and anticipate what's going to happen. And we all know that there are coaches out there that are stuck in their ways for whatever reason, because they truly and honestly believe that the system that they have is the best, or maybe they're just closed-minded, or maybe they're not as willing to get out there and be educated. Although I think that type of coach is going away simply because of the access to information that everybody has. I mean, there's certainly degrees of how much time people put in, just like there is in any other profession. But I think that there's no excuse out there for coaches anymore. You can't hide behind the fact that, well, I can't get the information that I need because, again, we all know how accessible information is out there for sure. I wanted to ask you about that transition from your first head coaching job to your second, because I think this is something that there's probably quite a few coaches out there who have gone through a similar transition where their first job is maybe at a program that is not quite as good as maybe what they hope. And so you build that program up and then you get an opportunity with a better program or maybe there's a little bit more pressure. So what was that like, not necessarily from an X's and O's standpoint, but just from maybe a handling expectation or kind of an outside influence standpoint between those two jobs?
Yeah, definitely a challenge that I knew I was getting into, and it was a little intimidating. And I think when you're genuine and you care about the kids, you care about the program, you're not there just to win. Winning's going to be a byproduct. I think it takes some of the pressure off because you're sitting in your office, and whether you make mistakes or not, you're trying to do good. And the expectations were definitely there. I mean, Langston Galloway, who's been playing in the NBA for several years now, had just graduated. They had a historic season. And we were in a transition year my first year. They had graduated 7 seniors that all played on the state championship team prior to the year that I got there. So I came at a good time where our expectations were extremely high. Players were used to winning and expected to win. So we had that going for us. But these guys, it hadn't been their turn yet. It was just starting to be their turn. And my first year, we had some injuries going into the playoffs. We got ousted in the second round. And I'm like, hey, this is the furthest I've ever been, feels good. And and they didn't have the same feeling. So I quickly felt the expectations of that program the next year. And, looking back, if I could do it all over again, I think I'm a 10 times better coach than I was back then. Some players that reach out to me from there, it's like I want to hug them and apologize. Just be like, man, I was so bad on so many levels. If I could do it again, you'd be a much better player, and we'd had so much more fun. And but we, my second year we won a state title. My third year we lost in the Final Four at the buzzer, and then the next year I moved on to Catholic. So it was kind of baptism by fire, but I think that brings out the best in you.
And so the opportunity to come back home to Catholic, obviously for you, the enticement is it's where you went to school. How did that job come open and how did you get that opportunity?
So I remember that weekend of the Final Four when we lost in the playoffs. We lost on a Thursday in the semifinals, and I think the job came open on Saturday. And I think I interviewed on Tuesday. So it flipped really quickly. It was a job for me, was a no-brainer. I mean, I went, up in classifications, more resources, more students, just, and obviously alma mater, all those things going for it. It was a no-brainer for me, but, from a basketball perspective, when I took the job, I had a lot of coaches reach out and be like, man, what are you doing? Just with the success we were having where I was at. I always viewed, even years before this job, as a sleeping giant. I truly got into coaching at the high school level to coach at Catholic high school because that's what I knew. That's what I loved. So it was a no-brainer for me to take the job. And when I took the job, they were a little down the previous years. We hadn't made the playoffs in 3 years. And we've done that every year since I've been there. And we've grown in so many ways on and off the court. And just being at Catholic high school, it just makes you a better person. And it's made me a far better coach.
All right. So what were some of the things that when you came in and took over, what were some of the things that you felt you needed to do or to add to the program at the time when you first took it over? What were your priorities when you first got the job?
I felt like the program was on autopilot in a lot of ways. guys would come and they worked hard, and it just like I said earlier, high expectations, whether you're a janitor or the principal, so they're always going to lift, and they're going to practice and practice hard, and they're going to work, but it just had an autopilot feel to it. And when I first got the job, I just met with each player and really just wanted to get the pulse of them in the program. And it was just a little lukewarm. So tried to reinvigorate. I think when you take over a program, just some visual change is nice. We ordered a gun. We got some new uniforms. We spruced up some things just so they could see change before they had to work to make more change. So that was one. Just wanted to build excitement with the alumni and the community and the school. And then we wanted to play a much more exciting brand of basketball. So play up tempo. We started implementing the style of play that we play now, and every year it just started to grow. And really, even first year we were a little bit above 500. The next year we won a district title, which was I think our 11th title in like the last 125 years of the school. So pretty big deal. I mean, our district's very competitive, so we had success early, which kind of propelled us a little faster than I probably even imagined. And then honestly, we've been blessed. I've been blessed to have a really good coaching staff that's really loyal, hardworking, and we've been blessed to get some good players. That always makes us look far better than we actually are.
Understood. Players always help. There's no question about that. Let's talk two things. I want to talk to you a little bit about building a staff, and then come back and dive a little bit into the X's and O's side of it and talk a little bit about the style of play, because I know it's something that you're really passionate about and that you love sharing with other coaches. So let's start, first of all, with coaching staff. Talk about your philosophy for building a staff, what their responsibilities are in your mind to the program, and then conversely, what your responsibilities are to them as their head coach.
Sure. So I'll start with at the end there. My responsibility as them as a head coach, I think, is to make them better. So I'm really dedicated to improving them, because it's only going to make us a better program. And I hope to have assistants that want to move on. In fact, one of our assistants just took a head job this off season. So ideally a staff, I would love to have a veteran guy that's kind of been in a lot of fires and seen a lot of different things and have to navigate some different issues. But I'm blessed with guys that I get along with really well. We're all about the same age, so we can joke and have fun, but we all love the game. We're all really competitive. I think some ways to develop the staff is, one, give them ownership. I think a very unique way to do this, and I just started doing this a couple of years ago, and I love it. I have them write down their job description in our program. So I used to be the guy that would make my coaching manual and say, you're going to be in charge of this and you're going to be in charge of this. Some of it's common sense. I have one assistant that really gravitates towards offense. I have one that gravitates towards defense, another towards skill development. That stuff's easy. But from a job description standpoint, they tell me how much film they want to watch. They tell me if they want to be responsible for a scouting report. I have a young assistant that I'm really trying to pour into and mentor, and he, in his job description, said, I don't feel comfortable scouting opponents. I feel really comfortable breaking down our film, but I don't really know what I'm watching when I watch somebody else's team play. So if I wouldn't have asked for that information, I'm probably thinking I'm doing him a favor and making him feel important by saying, hey, these are your scouts for the season. And he's thinking, oh, crap, why am I doing this? So I think that's one thing. That's an easy way to give them ownership. And my philosophy is, whatever the stuff is that y'all don't want to do, I'll do it. So if it's scouting, or if it's, whatever part, if assistant coach 1, 2, 3, 4 doesn't write it down in their job description, well, my job description becomes very clear too. I get to do all the stuff they don't want to. So that's number one. I think number two, we try to meet as a staff before every event. And I've really challenged them to take ownership in everything we do. So as you know, there's a million things that can come up in a day. whether you're coaching in high school, college, I'm sure professional, just there's always fires that you're putting out. So I tell them all the time, like on the itinerary, if it says we walk to the bus at 4:44, if I'm not there at 4:44, like that doesn't mean we just leave late. Like you guys have the itinerary, get them on the bus, So where I'm always challenging them to assume that I'm not there, because there's going to be a day where I'm not going to be there, or you're going to need to take control like I had to as a 19-year-old. We have after action reviews after every practice where we're giving each other feedback. We talk about giving honest, hard feedback in one-on-one conversations. So it's non-confrontational. We're not trying to big league anybody. And we set goals for our staff in practice. So coaches will set goals of, we have 24 players in our program. I'm going to make really good eye contact with 12 today, or I'm going to physically touch 18 players today at practice. And so we'll reconvene after, and it's pass fail. It is like, did you have really good eye contact with 12? No, but I got 8. And if we're not shooting for 12, we might not have had any kind of eye contact with our players. And so we're just always looking for ways to challenge each other, because that's the point of a staff is you cover all your bases, but everybody has so many unique gifts. Like when I think of mentors for me, that's such a hard question for me to answer because I learn from everybody. Like I'm going to learn from doing this podcast today, and I learn from my assistants because they're better at things than I am. I always talk about in fact, I had a one-on-one meeting with my assistant yesterday before a staff meeting. And I just told him, like, man, I think you need to start leading more drills, because when players hear my voice, it's just, I got a rough tone to my voice. Like I can't sing. I always joke I sound like a garbage disposal when I talk or sing. So sometimes when I'm just like I'm trying to give a player a notification or very easy feedback, they could feel kind of attacked, just my tone. I think one thing I'm learning now is it's not what you say, it's not what you mean, it's how that player feels after you give feedback. It doesn't matter where, you can't say what's coming from a good place or that's not what I meant. It's just bottom line is however that player feels when they leave that conversation, that's all that matters. And I think my tone can just be harsh sometimes. So I'm telling him, you got to take over more, because I think hearing a different tone would be really good.
Two things that jump out at me from what you said. One is, I think it's really, really important, and I think this is a lesson for all coaches, and I had never heard anybody say what you just said, which is sort of setting these mini goals within a practice for your staff. To me, that makes just a ton of sense, that you focus on some of the things that we all know are important, but that oftentimes get left by the wayside. We may not think about putting our hand on 18 out of 24 players' shoulder or making that eye contact like you described. And the word that comes to mind that we've talked about with other coaches is being intentional. And a lot of us, you think about what coaches are doing now during the off season and during this time when we're all shut down and everybody's learning and going to virtual clinics and listening to podcasts and getting involved and just trying to do some of the things that you talked about earlier. And we write those things down, we kind of think about them, we say, hey, we want to do that. But when it comes time for us to reconvene with our players and our coaching staffs, if we're not intentional about making those things happen, I think it doesn't happen. And so I hear you talking about having those meetings and setting those mini goals. And to me, that's something that just popped out as, wow, that to me is an actionable thing that me as a coach, I can do every single day. And that's something that it doesn't even necessarily have to be as formal as what you guys are doing. You could just have that conversation from the locker room to the practice, to the practice court. Hey, what are you going to focus on today? What are you going to focus on today? What are the things that give us one thing? And now you've got something to be intentional about. And I think that's where good coaches really do a great job, is being intentional with some of those little things that we all know make a difference, but sometimes within the course of a practice or a season, they can kind of get lost.
Yeah, and honestly, when we set those goals, some of them are lead with questions. So like I talked about my tone just being harsh. When a player makes a mistake, instead of saying, hey, you should have set the screen here, just hey, Daniel, what could you have done better? And if he says, oh, I should have set the screen 2 steps higher. Well, then he's taken ownership for his development. He arrived at the conclusion, so he's going to remember it. And then now all I did was ask a question. I didn't have to coach him or correct him. And I find that when those things became the focus, like when I was focused on saying every player's name within the first 5 minutes of practice or touching every player, I had the best practices and our team had the best practices. I wasn't putting pressure on myself or the players to execute really well. I was just putting pressure on myself to connect with my players. And if you're doing that, it's likely going to spill over into your practice.
So when did you start to come to the realization that these were some of the things that you needed to do? Like, I'm thinking about the questioning piece of it. And when I go back to the way I was coached, the way I coached early in my career when I was still coaching at the high school level, compared to the last 4, 5, 6 years I've coached my kids' AAU teams, that's been the bulk of my coaching. But I just think about how different I am as a coach and the things that I've done that I wouldn't have done in the past. And coaching with questions is one of the things that, as soon as I heard that, I said, that makes a ton of sense to me. And I started doing it and I started seeing good results. So how do you come about and come to some of these things that you know are important and then going ahead and implementing them? Just talk about how the process goes for you when it comes to that.
Great question. And you actually answered, I'm going to have a very similar, arrival to that answer that you did. And I think I've got a little different perspective now because I do some consulting as well. And so I see it from both sides. I'm a lifelong learner. I don't have all the answers, but when I find something, you don't know what you don't know. And you get that moment of clarity where it's like, I didn't even know this existed. I thought I was doing the best that I could, and I thought I was doing the best method, and I didn't even know this other method was out there. And man, it is so much better than what I've been doing. So I think that's part of just growth mindset, lifelong learner. JP Nurbin, who is a consultant that I hire on a regular basis that doesn't care about X's and O's. He's a basketball background, but he deals with all sports at all levels. And I bring him every year to watch my practice just to coach how I run my practice and how I interact with players. And he has had a huge development on me because when I hired him, I didn't realize that I didn't know these things. I thought, we were running good practices technically and tactically, but man, were we missing out on so much better systems and behind the scenes things that really elevated our program. So now as a consultant, I see other coaches have that. When I'm sharing something with them, they're just like, oh, like, man, that makes so much sense. So I think it's just when you get new information, the next part is you really have to challenge yourself to let your guard down, be vulnerable, and just I'm going to give this a shot because it's going to make me better. And I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier is some coaches are just comfortable. We ask players to get outside their comfort zone on a daily basis, be comfortable being uncomfortable, push yourself until you're out of your comfort zone. But man, how many coaches do that on a daily basis or even a yearly basis? I think sometimes once we get that head coaching title, we have some success, we think we're done, but success is never final. Success is not an event. I've won a state title. I've won my fair share of district titles, and that doesn't fulfill me. I get far more fulfillment out of being a better coach than achieving things and getting trophies.
Yeah, I think that's true for anybody who truly is motivated by being outstanding at their craft. It's the old adage of, again, it's the process that is exciting. And that's not to say that what that pot at the end of the rainbow, that state championship, that victory, that success story isn't satisfying, but there's more to it. If you really want to continue to be successful, it's an ongoing process. We just had JP on about, I guess I probably did the interview about 3 weeks ago, and his episode went up about 10 days ago. And I was blown away by some of the things that he had to share And I actually saw him on the virtual coaches clinic. And as soon as I listened to his presentation there, I'm like, I got to get this guy on. And then I went and read some of the things on his website, which were just outstanding. And he and I are right now working on, I think we're going to do 4 podcasts a year just to have him come on and talk about some of the things that, kind of take a deep dive into some of his culture building things and transformational coaching and all that stuff. So I'm just curious, what were 1 or 2 things that he pointed out to you when you brought him on that you've made changes in terms of the way you run a practice or your culture, or just some of those things that he's an expert at?
Leading with questions was definitely one. Getting the player to arrive at the same conclusion himself. Also, we reference player-led program. I think we always want our players to take more ownership. We want to develop better leaders. And I think as coaches, it's so easy for us to just say, oh, it's a different generation, or oh, we just don't have leaders this year. But what he really opened my eyes to is I wanted those things. I preached those things, but I wasn't giving them the systems to do it. We've developed a leadership council. We've developed, we've changed the way we've started practice, where our practices start completely player led, where I don't coach at all. And this is not a new concept, but the way we execute it's a little different, where we've got a drill. We're going to do this drill for 1 minute. We set the success criteria before the drill starts, and it's usually something not to do with like a certain amount of makes in a certain amount of time. It's really just, hey, we're gonna sprint to the back of the line, or we're gonna give high fives every time we pass a teammate, or we're gonna communicate on every pass. And the only thing the coaches can say is reset. And if we say reset, it means it wasn't to our standard, and the clock goes back to a minute. And we're gonna do this drill until we are loud enough in our communication for that 1 minute to move on to the next one. And it spills over into the rest of your practice. And one huge eye opener to me was I was so vocal at practice, kind of what you said earlier, trying to model energy and intensity and communication. But when the coach is screaming the whole time, you're not opening the door for players to say anything.
So true.
So if you imagine an assistant coach sitting on the bench and the head coach is coaching every pass, throw it here, cut hard, jump to the ball, wall up. Well, as an assistant, you can't say anything because there's never a moment. And we were stifling our players' communication. So one, me being quiet opened the door for them to talk, and then giving them the ownership of, I'm not going to give you reminders. I'm not going to give you notifications. It's your job to do it to each other. So when I said reset, I wouldn't say who didn't communicate. So it was up to players to say, hey, Johnny, like, I didn't hear you over there. Like, you need to be louder. Or just reminders. So 2 types of communication we really talk about is notifications, where the good thing about notifications is they lack judgment. So when you get a notification on your phone that you have a text message, there's no judgment there. It's just saying, hey, you have a text message. And then the next part is reminders. So notification is after something has happened, or a notification is that something happened, and the reminders is before. So if our success criteria was we've got to call names on every pass before a player even passes, other players on the sidelines are saying, hey, call their name. So we wouldn't mess up and have to reset. And as coaches, that's what we want. And man, that we would start first 5 minutes of practice like that, and that would spill over to the rest of practice and really made a huge impact on our season this past year.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great idea. And I think it goes to something that has always been a challenge for coaches. And I think about my own experience both as a player and as a coach. And you talk about wanting to develop leaders on your team, and you talk about wanting kids to be able to communicate with each other and hold each other accountable and all these things. And I think so often that, we're coaches, we don't give those kids the blueprint. We don't show them, teach them, mold them into what that actually looks like. So I say, we don't have any leadership on this team, or man, we need to develop leaders, or our captains need to do more. But what 17 or 18-year-old kid has ever been taught what it means to be a captain or what it means to be a leader. And then when you combine that with a coach who, as you said, if you're talking all the time and constantly trying to provide that energy and you're never just standing back with your arms folded, watching and giving somebody else an opportunity to have their voice be heard, whether that be an assistant or a player like you talked about, you're just making it really, really difficult for those other people to step up into the roles that you probably ideally like them to have, which goes to my next question for you, which is most of the time when we think of people who are successful as head coaches or successful in anything in life, those people tend to be very particular about the way they want things done because they know in their mind what they feel like it takes in order to be a success. How difficult was the process for you once you start to realize these things about yourself? How difficult is it to sort of step back and not be as vocal, maybe as is natural for you? And then how difficult it is for you to delegate some of the things that you want to have be part of your program, to delegate it to someone else who may do it slightly different than you were? How much of a control freak are you, and how difficult is that process for you to let go of some of those things?
Yeah, something I work on daily. I'm motivated by competition, and I think I value concrete results. So like I want to see the needle moving in the right direction, and I know the standard that I want to work at and I want to operate at. So what's easy to do but hard to pull off is I'm going to do everything myself because I know it's going to be done to my level. I delegate more and more every single year, and I think having the same staff year to year, they know what to expect, but they have the knowledge of the content. So I find myself struggling to be quiet, honestly, more when my coaches are talking than when my players are talking. Because when the players are talking, you're just like, oh, this is great. This is perfect. But then when the coaches are talking, I'm like, that's not the exact teaching point. Or if I was operating this film session, I probably wouldn't have shown this clip or, and it's not, it's just kind of learning to say, like, it's not going to be the way I would probably do it. But you don't want to micromanage. I find myself, that's the micromanager in me wants to say like, hey, you can run this film session, but I would only use these clips and, let's keep it to these teaching points where I'm really doing the film session from the back of the room. But I think that's where I would struggle more is given the letting an assistant run something and not feel the need to interject in there. Because when you do, now they're hearing two different messages, delivered in different ways. And then I just think you kind of devalue what your assistant just prepared and showed to the team.
Yeah, absolutely. That goes back to what you said with developing your assistants. You have to give them an opportunity to have their voice and to be able to step out of their comfort zone. And whether it's leading the film session or leading a drill. And as you said, I think no matter what, you're never going to get somebody who does things exactly the way you do. It's just not reality. And so you have to end up being comfortable, and especially, as you said, getting to know your staff over the course of a number of years. If you've worked together with them, you sort of get to know what they do, what their strengths and weaknesses are, what they're capable of doing, and then continue to push them so that, again, you want them to fill in the gaps and fill in areas where maybe you're not as strong, or maybe you need some help in a particular area, or maybe they just have a particular strength at getting a point across to players in a certain way. And I think all that, when you start thinking about the process of being a head coach, and ultimately you mentioned it right off the top about not really knowing what it's like to be in that head coaching position until you're there. And then once you get there, I think the idea that overwhelms you as a head coach is, this is my program, my name is on it, and I want to have a hand in everything that goes on. And especially if, as I said, you're sort of a control freak because you're a successful person, which a lot of people who are successful want to have control over their environment. It's difficult, I think, to let that go. And it's something that good coaches, I don't think you learn that overnight as a head coach. As you said, I think it's a process that goes on over the course of time. I want to shift gears a little bit and give you a chance to talk a little bit about your offensive system. Talk a little bit about how you came to it, playing up-tempo, the pace and space game. Just talk a little bit about, give coaches an idea of what it is, why you came to it, why you think it's a great way, a great style to be playing in the year 2020.
So it goes back to after that state championship year, watching our film and realizing we really scored in more random moments of the game. Transition, I found that we'd be up by 10. We would get, a little spark where we got 4, 5, 6 points in transition. We had a couple just unscripted plays that we converted, and all of a sudden 10 was 20. And then it was like, okay, we're probably gonna win this game. And I just felt like we needed to be much better in those situations. So I actually met up with Coach Todd, former coach, and we went and watched a practice Division I team. And I met Doug Novak, who just was so willing to share everything with me. And we developed a relationship in 2010. And they were doing some things that really just sparked my interest. So I started trying to blend the motion background with the dribble drive stuff, and really pre-practice, I'm like, okay, well, they run dribble drive. This is perfect. I've been experimenting with this. And then they started screening and not losing flow in dribble drive. So I was like, well, that's really unique. And Coach Novak has kind of gone a different way with his approach from where he was at. They're doing something a little different. And we kind of blended some other things to create this style. But I think one is, you always have to remember why, one, we fell in love with the game. And I just for me, I'm watching Pete Maravich, or I'm watching Michael Jordan growing up and passing the torch to Kobe Bryant. And I don't think we're watching those games being like, oh man, that's a great set by Phil Jackson. Like, when I'm a player, I want to set that screen. We want to just play the game. It's why we love playing pickup. I still to this day love playing. I'm always the guy like, hey, one more game, let's go. Just because it's fun to just go out there and play. And so I think players would rather play that way. I think that's why they show up to your tryouts. It's not to run your play that you found on Twitter. So I always try to keep that in mind. What's fun, because if the players enjoy showing up every day, they're going to give you more. And we want to keep things pretty simple and really focus on skill development, create space for players to have opportunities to make plays for themselves or a teammate. But also, I find no knock against dribble drive. I found, me personally as a coach, when I ran it, I wasn't giving my players quite enough. I felt like sometimes our point guard felt like he was on an island, wasn't connected with his 4 other teammates on the floor. So we've really found a way that we have great ball movement and player movement, but we're creating space to where our players feel unleashed, but they also are really connected with the other 4 players, and we're all working together for that player to make his play. And even if the play is yours, it might not be the shot, but it's your play to make.
So when you start putting that system in and you start designing your practices around that system, how did your practice planning change? Was there anything that you did differently with your skill development, with your drill work, with the things that you tried to do day in and day out with your practices? How did the style of play that you went with, how did that impact your practices?
So in a big way, huge change in several ways. I would say the one thing that was constant is, since we were motion, we were already doing a lot of small-sided games, just 2-on-2, 3-on-3. I think we changed a lot of those to give offense the advantage to start the drill. And it was foreign to me. I'd always think, like, if you want to work offense, you start neutral or put offense at a disadvantage to make them rise to the level. But when you put offense at an advantage, you force defense into help and rotation, which means you're forcing offense into decisions. They have to read defense and find the right play. So that was a huge change. We shoot 10 times more than we used to running motion. And that goes to, the 5-out game. You have single gaps all over the floor in a traditional 5-out alignment. So it just leads towards the passing game. because there's not a lot of driving gaps. So, and then back then teams weren't shooting the three so much. So it wasn't that we were probably coaching in the present / maybe a little bit of the past at that point. But now with the way the game has changed, where everything's off the bounce and teams are shooting a lot of threes, I find that coaches are trying to blend their old offense with that new style. And it's not that you can't have success doing that, but we've stripped away all the fluff, all the things that don't matter and don't equate to making plays in space, to where now we have so much more time for skill development, shooting. And really, if we're not doing those two things, we're competing. And now our practices are harder, but they're shorter. We practice more in the jungle than the zoo. So we're preparing our players to play against pressure in the free-flowing, unscripted moments of the game, where before I, as a coach, and I don't think my players were comfortable in that game. I know just from a motion perspective, if we were facing a team that was just going to get up in our jersey and pressure us, we knew it was going to be really tough. And now, whether you're pack line, pressure, zone, it doesn't matter. Like I'm just so numb to what the defense is doing and what they're preparing for. I'm numb to us going 0 for 5 from 3 to start a game, because it's what we do. Doesn't mean we don't tweak and prepare our, we're not ignorant to our opponents' strengths or weaknesses, but we have a clearly defined style of play, and we're prepared for any moment, any scheme defensively that we're going to see. So it's really just being a resource for our players, reminding them going into a game like, hey, this is going to be better against this team, but we're not scrambling on a Wednesday, Thursday to install something for Friday.
All right. So you mentioned that from a practice standpoint, you took out a lot of the fluff and you just focused on things that your kids are going to be doing in game situations. So what are some examples of that fluff that you took out, things that used to be a part of your practice planning that you've taken out now that you don't spend time on?
More things on air, more drills that involve no defense or no reads or decisions. So just, I hate to say fundamental drills, but I find, maybe we were doing drills that worked fundamentals that we've really already mastered. And we were just staying in that comfort zone of the drill or of the skill, rather than adding defense and making it more competitive, knowing that it's going to be ugly, but when you go on a Tuesday, Friday, there's going to be defense out there. And if you don't practice ugly, you're not going to be prepared for it. So I find I thought good coaching was clean practice. Now I just think good coaching is making sure that everything you do in practice directly correlates to the game, and it's something that's going to show up. So we really just focus on what happens a lot in a game. We better be doing that a lot in practice. And then watching film of where do we break down in the game, and this is where we're going to start from in practice.
All right, so that's what I wanted to ask you. That's my next question. When you start looking at and thinking about either what you do in games or when you're looking at a specific opponent, when you're setting up a small-sided game, do you try to set it up advantage, disadvantage, offense versus defense? Just maybe give us an idea or maybe one example of something that you do that sets up a particular action in a small-sided game, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so if we don't really change our defense to play like our opponent, but like you said, we can manipulate the look that we give our players. So for instance, in running a drive in space attack or dribble drive, teams can get weary of playing against pack line because they're gonna be in gaps and take away your dribble penetration, which is your main way that you create advantages. So what we would do is set up a small-sided game where maybe we have to get 2 paint touches before we score, or probably even better than that, just put them in a position where we have small advantage. We're going to draw help, where that first attack isn't going to get it done, but can we find the big advantage on the floor? And then what I like even better against the pack line is drive, kick, and have an extra pass out, because now we're getting multiple closeouts out the paint. And I think if you can we look at it through how can we get them in rotation? If they're pressure, if they're pack, if they're zone, paint touches compromise any defense. So how are we going to play once we get the paint touch? I find coaches too often focus on the stuff around the perimeter. When I was a motion coach, I'm focused on the screens, the flares, the cuts, and not really focused on, okay, well, like, what if we curl and get it? What happens next? Like, in my mind, it was like, okay, we lay it in for a layup, but there's going to be help there. You're going to be catching it in traffic. So we focus so much more on what happens after we get inside the 3-point line. Because if you lined up and played pickup against your opponent on Friday night, no rules, no coaching, your guys are going to get in the paint. It's not like they need you to get them into the paint against the defense. So I think those random moments, your create actions will get you in the paint. And then what happens after that? So what are we going to do to get defense in rotation? And then what are our concepts that we can really emphasize out of rotation? For instance, against the pack line, we want to drive, kick, and get extra passes out. If you get any defense in rotation, you get them out of their defensive philosophy. So if a pack line team gets compromised by getting flattened or a deep paint touch, then they're going to be in, oh crap, closeout mode and not pack line mode. So then we've got them. And we just have to make sure we're creating enough of those advantages to create opportunities.
Makes complete sense. How do you go about then? The other thing that you talked about was working and spending a lot of time during your practices on shooting. So what do your shooting practice, what does that look like when you're shooting in practices? Give me again just maybe a general overview and then something specific that you do to work with your players on shots that they're going to see in a game. Yeah,
so we do some stationary shooting and we do shooting on air. I think like everybody does, and we just we categorize those as our individual shooting drills. I think there's a lot of merit to giving them confidence in their shot. We're developing, stroke and rhythm and confidence. Those are like your feel good shots. But then I think what we do is beyond those drills, try not to isolate shooting. So if we're shooting, there's always a footwork element involved. It could be we take 3 perimeter shots, and then on our 4th one, we're going to attack the rim. So we're going to work on our catch, look for our shot, attack a closeout, and then give me this type of finish. We're going to go off 2 feet every time today. Or it could be we're going to shoot. Once we get the rebound, we're going to take 2 hard dribbles. We're going to stride stop, pivot, and we have to pass to a new line. To where now we're not spending 5 minutes on stopping and pivoting, and we're not spending 5 minutes on shooting. We're going to work on those things together. So we do that a lot. I mean, I just, when we're repping offensive stuff, if we're doing like 3-on-0, just working on some timing and execution of some actions, we always end with everybody's getting a shot. And that way we're getting those game shots in. We also chart every shooting drill in practice. So not only are you chasing your peers on a shooting ladder, but you're also chasing your personal record for each drill. So one of our younger assistants has a clipboard. Every shot that you shoot, when you finish the drill, you go give him your score. So we have a shooting ladder. It gives more meaningful reps, I think. And then in our competitive cauldron for practice, for instance, let's say we have a shooting drill that if you and your partner make 40 makes in 4 minutes, if y'all accomplish that, then you're going to get a skills win in our competitive cauldron, which is weighted a certain amount. So just always competing for something. But if we're not playing live, there's typically a shooting element in there. Our passing drills always end with a shot. We very, very rarely do a quote unquote passing drill. We're usually passing, catching, shooting. So I think that's a way where we have found ways to shoot 30 to 45 minutes every single day. Is there's always something else that we're working with it.
Understood. How do you use the competitive cauldron and the charting? What do you use that for from a coaching standpoint? What do you look at when you're looking at that? How does that influence decisions that you make as a coach? And then how do you feel like that impacts your players day to day? You already mentioned a little bit of, again, they see that, they know it's there, so it motivates them to continue to work. But how do you use that as a coach?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important is make it really visual, so players do see it every day. I think I coach guys that if we didn't create an environment that was competitive, they wouldn't really fight for it and be competitive. They would work hard, but I think there's a huge difference between working hard and competing. So I think just having the competitive cauldron builds that intrinsic motivation to compete and want to win. It builds personal responsibility and team responsibility and accountability because we know there's going to be a winner and a loser. We don't run for losing. The reward for winning is winning. Winning breeds winning. It pays to be a winner. We don't use it to set our starting lineup either. But I think outside of those things, from a coaching standpoint, it can validate what you're seeing. So man, I don't know that this guy is getting it done. And he's 15th on the competitive cauldron, probably validating what I'm seeing. Or, assistant coach is saying, I think this guy needs to play more. I just give him a shot. And then you look at the cauldron, he's third, and you're oh, geez, okay, maybe so, and even if it's not all right, tomorrow's game, we're throwing him in there, it's going to change the lens that I'm going to look at him at practice. And
absolutely.
And if, as a coach, if you look for the good, you're going to find it. If you look for the bad, you're going to find it. So if I'm looking for the good in Johnny, because he's third on the competitive cauldron, I'm going to find it. But if I'm looking for the bad in a player because he's at the bottom, I'm probably going to find that too. And I think you can have those bottom guys try to rise to the level of the top and really push the guys at the top. And another thing that we've experimented with is carry scores over from the drill. So we like to play all of our drills to 8 by 2s and 3s. That way it's quick games. You can't take a play off or you're probably going to lose. And if you're out of the drill, it doesn't take very long for you to get back in. But what we'll do is maybe put 3 small-sided games in a row, and we're going to carry the score over to where if it's 2 varsity groups playing against each other, then maybe the score is 24-20. And you could say, all right, let's put 2 minutes on the clock. Let's play it out like it's the end of the game. Well, that has so much more weight to it than a coach putting, 70-74. Let's recreate this situation. They haven't really fought for that 70-74 score, but they have fought for that other score through those 3 small-sided games. Or if you're going varsity versus JV, we try not to do that very much, but let's say varsity's whooping the JV 18-6. We could say, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to go 5-on-5 and play, but flip the scores. Varsity, y'all have 6, JV, y'all have 18. And just find ways to challenge our players through that cauldron. And because we are keeping score, I just think it makes things so much more competitive and fun.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great idea there with the scores carrying over and just making everything have importance in what's going to happen next rather than just artificially coming up with, as you said, a score, which we know lots of coaches do that, have done it, probably will continue to do it when you're working on special situations or end of game type things. But I think what you just shared makes a ton of sense to me, how that would be something that the kids are going to, again, start to understand. After you do that a few times, they start to realize that, hey, this isn't just impacting this section of practice. This could have an impact moving forward on what's going on. I think that connection makes it even more game-like and tries to get them into an experience that is like what they're going to have to go through when they're actually playing a game.
Yeah.
We're coming close. Sure, go ahead.
I was going to say one more thing with special situations.
Yep.
Always a hot topic. We did not do this last year, but we did it the previous year. I find when you watch your own film of special situations, if you won the game, that's kind of all they care about. It's all right, coach, we won. We all feel good. That's what we won. If you lost, they're just hurting and they're aggravated that they have to relive it and that you're going to point out all their mistakes. So we started pulling up NCAA tournament games that were really close, and we would go recreate that. So we would watch, we watched Memphis, Kansas, I think 2008. and we were looking at, like, I would pause it and say, like, well, what should Memphis have done there? And they're like, they waited too long to foul. I'm like, exactly right. Like, that's a great point. Or I found that when I wouldn't lead with questions, it was because I was scared they weren't going to have the answer and they were going to miss the point. But even if they don't have the right answer, you at least know what your players, how they're looking at the game. So we would start it from put the score on the clock and start the game from where we started watching it in the locker room. And I found that just it depersonalized some special situation coaching points, and then just made it fun. Like, let's go recreate Kansas, Memphis. So I thought that was pretty cool too.
Yeah, that is very cool. Because like you said, they don't have obviously a personal stake in what you're watching on the tape if they're not watching themselves play versus you're watching your own situation. And yeah, if it goes in, everybody's excited regardless of what the execution or the situation
Right.
may have been. It's just like, woohoo, we won.
Yeah.
And conversely, you could do everything right in an end of game situation, and maybe the opponent just makes a great play or one of your kids misses an open shot. And the takeaway should be, hey, we did everything right. It just, sometimes a shot doesn't go in. Where you take that out of there when you use it with with a neutral game that they're not invested in. So I could see the value in that for sure. As we start coming towards the end of our time, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your consulting business and just share with us, how you came up with the idea, what made you want to do that, and then just talk about some of the cool opportunities that you've been afforded as a result of that. Because I think that you've obviously gotten a chance to travel and talk to coaches all over the country, which we're kind of getting to do on a similar scale, not without the travel piece of it, but just being able to talk to coaches for Jason and I has been tremendously valuable and interesting and exciting. So just talk about why you started it, how you started it, and what's been what you've enjoyed about the consulting piece.
Yeah, so it really started organically. The way we play, I felt like, is really unique, although more teams are shifting to that style. But I think, 10 years ago, it really stood out to where we'd go to a team camp out of state, or just, I would get feedback from coaches saying like, man, y'all were a bear to prepare for, because we've never seen a team with y'all spacing before, or, just you get all kind of feedback, and it breeds some curiosity. And especially with social media, now everything's accessible. So coaches would reach out, and I would just give information. And I felt like just shooting them some diagrams was like, I was really being a help, but this stuff without the context falls flat. If you're not able to troubleshoot it, because there's going to be issues with anything that you're running, especially when you're running it your first year, you haven't been through the fire yet. You can't anticipate problems, or, it might take some losses to figure some things out. Where I started getting film of coaches I was sharing with, and I was just like, oh man, like, this isn't it. Like, there's so much that I could share with him. I just don't have time, or maybe I had time early. And then as more coaches reached out, it just became like a hobby of mine, is just reach out, share, network with coaches. And then I hired a consultant, and it showed me how much value that could really bring. And I've always been the type to just, if I see something that could be better, like, I have to really hold back to not give that feedback, just because I want things done at a really high level, whether it's my program or not. And so just being able to meet with coaches and have coaches that have me on a retainer to help implement and offense, but also just everything. We talk about everything underneath the sun. I've traveled all from coast to coast, from LA to Boston, and a lot of places in between, sharing basketball and observing practices. So that's been really fun, is to network with like-minded coaches, and help their program. That's really the only goal that I have, is for me to help you any way I can. But the awesome thing, and you would probably share this sentiment, is just carrying those relationships. Like, if I go do a clinic in Tulsa or Lexington or Florida, it's just like you have a community of coaches that, whether they're working directly with me or not, I just can follow them and their program, and we reach out to each other. And that's been really cool, because, just relationships are what we're in this for, with players and with other coaches.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you any more on that particular statement, Mark. One of the things that has stood out for Jason and I since we started doing the podcast, and really we had no idea when we started it, just we started out the whole idea of our show in the beginning was it was going to be a youth basketball parenting podcast is kind of the way we started. And then we ended up doing some interviews. And then before you know it, those interviews said, hey, we'll open up our contacts to you. And because we really enjoyed what you guys are doing and we think you're in it for the right reasons. And then before you know it, as you said, you've kind of been able to build this community around what you do and the opportunity to talk to people, not just in your own local area, but people all over the country and in some cases all over the world is just, it's incredible. And then the thing that we've been struck by, and I think you probably agree with this statement, is just how open and willing to share everybody in the coaching profession has been since we started. It's incredible to me just how open people are about sharing the things that they do in their program, the things that they feel help to make them successful. And then not only sharing it with us on the podcast, but then being willing to say, hey, anybody who has a question or wants to know more or just has something they want to reach out and just connect. The amount of times that people have said it, it's incredible. And I'm sure you're seeing that same thing.
Yeah. I mean, coaches reach out all the time and I love it. I mean, in fact, if you've ever reached out to me, I'd be surprised if I didn't respond by saying thanks for reaching out, because just when you get different questions, it makes you better as a coach and it makes you evaluate why you do things. And I'll say this, like as a consultant, the hard balance is you want to give things away, you want to share and you want to, publicize what you're doing. But at the same time, it's like you have things that are of value to you that you want to protect. And really the only things that I don't give away are the things that like, I really don't have time to walk you through this step by step.
Right. Understood.
Or if I just gave you this, like, it's really not going to help, like we're all good enough coaches to see a set play on Twitter or YouTube or from a podcast and say like, okay, we could run that set. This is such a different animal. This is a style of play where your defensive system plays into this, your transition system where there's a million decisions that you have to make and you don't even have to do it my way. I've got coaches that have me on a retainer that don't even run what we run on offense, but they want the other pieces to it. So there's so many variables in it that I share a lot and I've benefited by so many coaches that share. So that's the hard balance, is trying to give these things away while doing it the right way.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that you also have to take whatever it is that either you're getting from someone who's sharing with you or conversely the things that you're sharing and understand on both ends of that equation that you also have to fit what works for you, your program, your style of coaching, your staff, your players, which again, we all know there are subtle differences even for you and your program from year to year, depending on who the kids are and if your staff changes. There are just things that may be applicable one year that may not be applicable in another year. And so I think you're 100% spot on that it's the sharing, it's that interaction between two coaches. It's kind of hashing things out that helps you not only, it doesn't matter which side of the equation you're on. You could be on the side that's sharing and then get some feedback from the person you're sharing with, and that can kind of get you to think about things. And then obviously, conversely, if you're the person who is gaining information, you're also sort of starting to question the way that you do things and just look at everything. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is being intentional. I think if you're a coach and you're focused on the process and you're intentional about trying to improve at what you're doing, ultimately what that does is it leads to this exchange of ideas that helps everybody to grow in the profession of coaching. And to me, that's really what it's all about. Mark, before we wrap up, because we're just coming up on an hour and a half, I want to give you a chance to share where people can reach out to you. Tell them about the things that if they're interested in the consulting piece of it, just give your social media, anywhere people can reach out to you, find out more about what you're doing. And then if there's any final point that you want to make before we finish, you can go ahead and do that. And then I'll jump back in and wrap up the episode.
Yeah. So quickly, what you just said about the sharing part, I think as coaches, when we find new things, it reinvigorates us and our players in our program. So encourage everybody, no matter what you're looking for, find new things, get all the ideas, use few. I'm always available on Twitter, direct message at Coach Cascio, pretty active on there. My email is markcascio@gmail.com, website coachcassio.com. Love when coaches reach out, love sharing the game. As far as the consulting thing goes, it could be whatever you want. I'll have some coaches that just come and they want one webinar just to kind of see what we're doing. I have some that just schedule webinars as they see fit throughout the year. And then I have others that really want to take it to the next level. Basically, I'm one retainer as an assistant to you. Any resource that I have is directly yours. All you have to do is ask for it if I haven't already shared it with you. So I have some things available on CoachTube as well for sale, which is a new thing for me. But the bottom line is, like we've said, I like meeting coaches and networking, and there's always a process that we can find that'll work for you and your program. Nothing that I do is cookie cutter. It's all 100% for you and what works for you.
Awesome. Mark, we can't thank you enough for spending some time here with us tonight. It's been a lot of fun and very educational to get a chance to learn about what you've done, building your program, building your consulting business. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Hoopheads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.